A shrill cry echoed from upstairs. Her heart skipped a beat. It was a baby's cry, sharp, desperate. The sound immediately made her stop. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't the usual noise that came with cleaning these grand houses. This was something different, something urgent. She paused for a second, gripping the broom tightly in her hand. Should she ignore it and keep working? Or should she check on the child? It wasn't her place. But the cry, there was something in it that felt like it was pulling at her, like it was pulling her into something bigger than herself. A choice. The decision was made before she even realized it. She set down the broom and walked toward the staircase. Protagonist's world. Her name was Vanessa. She wasn't used to luxury. She was used to cramped apartments, the hum of broken-down cars, and the struggle of stretching every dollar just to make ends meet. Every day was a challenge, and every evening was spent wondering if she was going to wake up and still be stuck in the same life. But Vanessa had something most people didn't: resilience. She fought through the hard days, and though the world often overlooked her, she never stopped pushing. She worked for everything she had, whether it was the small, lonely apartment she lived in or the minimum wage jobs she juggled. She dreamed of something more, though, something better, a life where she wasn't just scraping by. But dreams weren't always enough. Today, however, she was standing in the very mansion she once imagined she'd never even step foot in. Tall columns, shining chandeliers, and polished marble floors. Everything in this world was so far removed from her reality. And yet, here she was, cleaning someone's lavish home, knowing that at the end of the day she would return to the life she knew best. Her world felt like it was in two separate pieces, one foot in the gutter and the other, for a brief moment, walking through a dream. But that dream was about to change her life. Inciting incident. She grabbed her cleaning supplies and began her usual routine. Dust the counters, polish the windows, sweep the floors. She had no idea who the owners were, just another wealthy family who hired her to do the grunt work. But as she moved from room to room, she heard that cry again. The baby. It echoed louder this time, filled with desperation. Vanessa stood frozen for a moment. She wasn't the type to get involved in other people's business. She had enough of her own problems. But something about that cry, raw, vulnerable, pulled at her in a way she couldn't ignore. Her footsteps were hesitant as she moved toward the staircase. She thought for a moment about ignoring it. Maybe it wasn't her problem. But as she stood there, frozen in indecision, the cry came again. Louder, more insistent, she made her choice. Triggering chaos. Upstairs, the house felt even colder. The hallway was long, and every room she passed seemed untouched by time, as if no one had lived there for years. The nursery door was cracked open. She stepped closer, and as soon as she pushed it open, her eyes landed on the small crib. The baby was crying, tears streaming down his little face, eyes wide with fear, his tiny fists clenched in distress. The room smelled faintly of lavender, but the sweetness was overshadowed by the tension. Something wasn't right. Vanessa's heart went out to the baby. She didn't know why she was drawn to him, but she couldn't leave him like this. She quickly crossed the room, her hands trembling as she picked him up. His body was warm, but his cries were louder, more frantic. She murmured softly to him, rocking gently as she whispered calming words. The baby's cries slowed, his sobs turning into sniffles until, eventually, he quieted in her arms. As she looked down at the small child, something stirred inside her. This wasn't supposed to be her responsibility. She wasn't even supposed to be here. Then the door creaked open behind her. Vanessa turned, startled. In the doorway stood a tall, imposing figure. His sharp suit, perfectly pressed, didn't match the vulnerability of the situation. It was the father, the millionaire. His eyes locked onto his son, still cradled in Vanessa's arms. His gaze was cold, emotionless, but as his eyes softened, his expression began to change. A flicker of something broke through his icy exterior. His son, calm and soothed in the arms of a woman who wasn't even supposed to be there. Something about it cracked through the walls he had built around himself. He had been a father once, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost that part of himself. Who are you?" he asked, his voice low, a mixture of confusion and anger. But there was something else, something unspoken. She hesitated for a moment, looking at the baby, then at him. I was just cleaning. I heard him crying. He needed someone. And just like that, the walls began to fall. Something shifted in him. His cold, distant demeanor, his entire life started to change. A shift so subtle, yet so deep, that Vanessa could feel it, even though she didn't know him. But he did. He saw his son calm for the first time in what felt like forever. And in that moment, he was no longer just a wealthy man. He was a father. The transformation was beginning. As Vanessa stood there, cradling the baby in her arms, the silence between them was thick, heavy. The millionaire, a man who owned this massive mansion, a man who could buy whatever he wanted, stared at his son, his mouth slightly agape, his face a strange mix of disbelief and something else, something more vulnerable than Vanessa had expected. He finally broke the silence. I didn't know what to do. His voice trembled, barely audible. The walls that had once seemed so firm and unshakable around him were crumbling, piece by piece. His eyes flickered between Vanessa and his son. I've never seen him calm like this. Vanessa stood still, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't a therapist or some child expert. She was just a woman trying to get through her day, but she couldn't ignore what she had witnessed. Something in that moment had shifted, and it wasn't just in the millionaire. The man moved slowly, stepping into the room, his eyes never leaving his son, his expression turning from cold to almost bewildered. I don't understand, he muttered, more to himself than to Vanessa. I've been trying for so long. Nothing works. He won't sleep. He cries all the time. His voice cracked, the rawness of his words slipping out before he could stop them. Vanessa hadn't expected to hear any of this. She'd come in to clean, not to be a part of someone's pain. But here it was, a man, a father, unraveling in front of her. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't here to fix anyone's problems. But there was something in his tone, a depth of frustration that resonated with her own struggles. Maybe he just needs someone to hold him, Vanessa said softly, her voice almost uncertain. Sometimes it's the simplest things that make the difference. The millionaire's gaze softened for a brief moment, but the coldness quickly returned as he looked away, almost as if embarrassed by his own vulnerability. He ran a hand through his perfectly combed hair, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The cracks had already appeared. For years, he had built walls around his emotions, around his son's needs. His life had been one of power, control, and success. But behind those walls was a man struggling with his own failures. The pressure to maintain his status, the expectations of the world, none of it had prepared him for fatherhood. For a long time, he had been ignoring the cries of his own heart, drowning them out with meetings, decisions, and the pursuit of more. More money, more power, more of everything that was supposed to make him happy. But here, standing before him, was the undeniable truth. His son, his own flesh and blood, was calling out for him, and he wasn't able to answer. Vanessa could feel the weight of his words in the air. She could sense his internal battle, caught between the life he'd built and the man he needed to become. "Why are you here?" he asked suddenly, his voice sharp. But the edge was gone now. He was searching for answers, just like she was. Vanessa shifted the baby in her arms, unsure of what to say. I just clean here." She paused. "But I heard him. I thought maybe he needed someone." The millionaire let out a deep sigh, rubbing his temples. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I've been so focused on work, on everything but him. I thought if I could provide, if I could give him everything I didn't have growing up, that would be enough." The words hit Vanessa hard. She knew what it was like to chase something, to believe that achieving more would solve the emptiness inside. But in her case, it was a fight for survival. For him, it was something deeper, something more hidden behind the lavish lifestyle and designer suits. She looked at him, her eyes soft with understanding. Maybe giving him everything doesn't mean anything if you're not really there for him. His eyes met hers, and for the first time there was no judgment in them, only raw, unfiltered emotion. The walls that had once defined him began to crumble, not with anger, but with a sense of guilt, realization, and maybe even fear. Fear that the life he had worked so hard to build had left him with nothing more than empty achievements. The room seemed to shrink as Vanessa continued to hold the baby, feeling the weight of the moment settling between them. But the millionaire wasn't done yet. He wasn't sure how to change. He didn't have all the answers. But something inside him stirred. It wasn't just the baby in Vanessa's arms that had caused this shift. It was the simple fact that someone had shown up at the right moment, someone who could see past his walls, who understood that there was more to life than just wealth and success. He exhaled deeply. Maybe I've been running from something I need to face. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. Instead, she rocked the baby gently, calming him further. This wasn't about her. It wasn't about fixing his problems. But in this moment, she was a witness to a man's struggle. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of his transformation. I need to change, he whispered to no one in particular. For him, for myself. Vanessa said nothing. She didn't need to. The moment had spoken louder than words ever could. The days that followed were unlike anything either of them had expected. The mansion felt quieter, less oppressive. Vanessa found herself thinking about the millionaire's words long after she had left. She wasn't sure why she kept going back to the scene, why it had left such an impact on her. It was just a baby, right? But there was something about it, something about the vulnerability of that moment, that made her believe that maybe she had seen something important. But for the millionaire, it was different. His life, the one that had once seemed so certain, so unshakable, was no longer enough. He couldn't go back to his old routine, not after what had happened, not after the baby had calmed in Vanessa's arms. He couldn't ignore the cracks in his armor any longer. The following week, Vanessa was called back to the mansion. She wasn't sure what to expect. After all, cleaning was still her job. But when she arrived, the atmosphere was different. It felt softer. There was a sense of calm that she hadn't felt before, even in the air. When she entered the house, she was surprised to see the millionaire in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. It wasn't just a quick cup of coffee and a pastry. No, he was actually cooking, fumbling a little with the eggs, but it was clear he was trying. The sight of him in this domestic setting was so far removed from the man she had first met, the cold, distant figure who walked through life like he had everything under control. But here he was, vulnerable, human. "I didn't know you could cook," she said, her voice betraying a bit of surprise. He turned around, a sheepish smile pulling at the corners of his lips. "I can't, really, but I'm trying." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Trying?" He nodded, a bit of frustration clouding his face. "I didn't even know how to make a proper breakfast for my son. I've been so focused on everything else, I forgot what really mattered. I've been so lost in all this." He gestured to the lavish kitchen around him, "that I forgot what it means to be a father." Vanessa watched him, her heart softening. There was something painfully honest about the way he spoke, like he had realized something too late. She'd never seen him like this before. The sound of the baby's laughter suddenly echoed through the hall, light and carefree, filling the space with warmth. Vanessa couldn't help but smile. The child was different too, calmer, more content. It was as if the house had shifted along with the millionaire. "I think he's doing better," Vanessa said, her voice gentle. The millionaire nodded, his gaze following the sound of his son's laughter. "I didn't even know where to start, but I guess the first step is admitting that I don't have it all figured out." There was a shift in his tone now, an air of humility she had never heard before. It wasn't just the walls that were coming down, it was the layers of denial he had wrapped himself in for so long. "I never wanted to be that kind of father. I thought success would make me a good parent. I thought if I provided, if I bought him everything he wanted, it would be enough. But all he really needed was me." Vanessa could see the change in his eyes. It wasn't just a moment of realization, it was a turning point. A shift so profound that she could almost feel the weight of it in the room. For the first time, the millionaire was finally seeing what really mattered. As he continued to prepare the breakfast, Vanessa found herself watching him closely. There was something almost fragile about him now, and it was clear he wasn't just trying to change his life for his son. He was changing for himself. This wasn't just about fatherhood anymore. It was about understanding who he was and what he had become. You know, Vanessa began, breaking the silence, I've cleaned for a lot of people, rich people, powerful people, but I've never met anyone like you. He paused, a bit caught off guard. What do you mean? I mean, she said, hesitating for a moment, you're finally seeing the most important thing in your life. That's more than a lot of people can say. His face softened as he turned to face her. I never thought I'd hear that from someone like you. Vanessa didn't know how to respond. She wasn't here to save him. She wasn't his therapist or a life coach. But there was something about him that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, this was where she was meant to be. Not as someone cleaning the house, but as a witness to a transformation, a story unfolding right before her eyes. Later that day, as she was cleaning the guest room, Vanessa couldn't help but reflect on the strange path that had brought her here. It was unexpected, to say the least. She'd never thought she'd have an impact on anyone's life, let alone someone as wealthy and powerful as him. But maybe that was the point. Maybe everyone, no matter how high they stood, needed someone to remind them of what was truly important. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to reality. It was a text from her sister. How's the cleaning job going? It read. She typed back quickly. It's going better than I thought. I think things might be changing for the better. The truth was, she wasn't just talking about the millionaire. She was talking about herself too. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she had learned one thing for certain. Sometimes life's most significant changes come when you least expect them. As the days passed, the changes were undeniable. The millionaire, Marcus, as Vanessa had learned his name, continued to surprise her. He wasn't the same man who had first hired her to clean his home. No, he was different now. His mornings were spent with his son, playing and laughing, the bond between them growing stronger each day. He was learning to be a father, something that seemed so foreign to him before. Vanessa couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her as well. The house was quieter, warmer. The cold, empty halls that had once echoed with loneliness now felt alive, filled with the sound of footsteps and laughter. She saw Marcus, a man who had once been consumed by his work and wealth, now pouring his time into something more precious. One afternoon, as she was dusting the living room, she overheard Marcus speaking on the phone in the next room. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Honestly, she wasn't. But the conversation was too intimate to ignore. She could hear his voice, softer now, less commanding, as he spoke with someone who seemed important. He was apologizing for missing a meeting, for neglecting his responsibilities, for being absent in so many aspects of his life. Vanessa paused, her hands stilling on the ornate fireplace mantel. She could feel the weight of his words, even though she couldn't make out every detail. She didn't need to. The shift in him was evident. Marcus wasn't just trying to fix things with his son. He was trying to fix the mess of his life, the relationships, the guilt, the constant pressure to be something he wasn't. As the phone call ended, he walked back into the room. His face was different now, softer but also more focused. There was a kind of clarity in his eyes. He wasn't just running from his problems anymore. Vanessa continued to clean, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had never imagined that cleaning houses would bring her into such intimate moments of people's lives. She wasn't just an outsider now, she had become part of the process. Marcus's transformation wasn't something she could ignore. One afternoon, as she was finishing up her work for the day, Marcus approached her. He didn't look like the man she had first met, the man who barely acknowledged her presence. Today there was a warmth to him, something that made her feel like he genuinely saw her as more than just someone there to clean his house. Vanessa, he began, his voice steady, I want to thank you for what you did for my son and for me. I know this might seem strange, but I feel like I owe you more than just this cleaning job. Vanessa turned around, surprised. Marcus, you don't owe me anything. I was just doing my job. But he shook his head, stepping closer. No, you did more than that. You didn't just clean this house. You changed my life. You reminded me of something I had completely forgotten. You reminded me what it means to truly live, to care for the people around you. Vanessa swallowed, suddenly unsure of what to say. I was just doing what seemed right, she replied quietly, her voice a little softer than usual. He nodded, a thoughtful look crossing his face. Sometimes the right thing isn't always clear, but you did it anyway. I've been so caught up in this world that I forgot what matters. I've been so busy trying to prove something to the world, to myself, that I lost sight of what I really needed. You showed me that. She blinked, momentarily taken aback. She hadn't expected this conversation to take this turn. Sure, she had helped him, but she never thought he'd feel so deeply about it. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded, accepting his gratitude without really knowing how to process it. But Marcus wasn't finished. I'm not asking you to stay here forever, Vanessa, but I want to do something for you. Anything. I want to make sure that you're taken care of. You deserve more than just this cleaning job. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. She had been living paycheck to paycheck for so long, and the idea of someone offering her something more, something genuine, felt foreign. She was used to doing everything on her own, fighting for every bit of stability she could get. The idea of someone else taking care of her felt strange, almost like it wasn't meant to happen. I'm fine, Marcus, she said quickly, her voice firm. I don't need anything. I just want to do my job. But he wouldn't let it go. Please, Vanessa, let me help. I see the way you work, how hard you try. You deserve a chance to do something more, something for yourself. You've already helped me. Let me help you. There was a long silence between them, and for the first time in a long while, Vanessa felt unsure of herself. She wasn't used to asking for help. She wasn't used to letting people in. But there was something in Marcus's eyes, something genuine, that made her feel like this wasn't just a transaction. This was a real offer, an opportunity to change her own life. I'll think about it, she said, finally breaking the silence. But I don't know what you can really do for me, Marcus. He smiled, a small but sincere smile. I'll leave that up to you. Just know that the offer is there. That night, as Vanessa walked home, the weight of his words hung in the air. She hadn't expected to be a part of something so life-changing, at least not her own life. She had always been the one on the outside, the one looking in. But now for the first time, she felt like she was a part of something bigger than herself. She didn't know what would happen next, but for once, she felt like she had options. And that, in itself, was a kind of freedom she hadn't known before. The following weeks felt like a blur for both Vanessa and Marcus. For Vanessa, the world seemed to shift in subtle ways, small, quiet moments that slowly began to change her perspective on life. For Marcus, the transformation was far more evident. He was no longer the same man who had hired her just weeks ago. He had become a father in every sense of the word, invested, present, and deeply involved in his son's life. But it wasn't just his relationship with his son that had changed, it was everything. One afternoon, as Vanessa entered the mansion to clean, she noticed the atmosphere was different once again. There was no longer an air of stiffness or tension. Instead, there was a lightness to the place, as if Marcus had let go of the weight that had been holding him down for so long. She walked into the living room to find Marcus sitting on the couch, a book in his hands, his son curled up beside him. When he saw Vanessa, he smiled. A real smile, the kind that spoke of peace rather than the controlled, practiced grins he used to give. Hey, Vanessa, he greeted her warmly. How's everything going? Vanessa hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer. She had been working nonstop, juggling her own responsibilities, and she wasn't sure where she stood anymore in this new chapter of her life. But as she looked at Marcus, sitting there with his son, there was a calmness in the air. It was a stark contrast to the tense, disconnected atmosphere she had walked into the first time she cleaned this house. Everything's fine, she said with a faint smile, her voice reflecting a new sense of certainty that had grown within her since her first visit. It's just different, you know? Marcus chuckled, setting his book aside. I know exactly what you mean. My life is different now, too. It's not about what I have anymore. It's about who I'm with, who I've become, and that's thanks to you. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Marcus, you don't have to keep thanking me. I just did what I thought was right. He shook his head. No, Vanessa, you didn't just do what was right. You helped me realize that it's never too late to change. I spent so much time chasing things, money, success, power, and I completely missed out on what really matters. You showed me that. Vanessa looked down at the floor, unsure of what to say. She had always been the one taking care of herself, keeping her distance, never allowing anyone to truly see her. But here was Marcus, a man she barely knew, thanking her as if she had changed his entire life. I wasn't trying to change you, Marcus, she said softly, almost to herself. I was just trying to help, I guess. Well, you did, he replied, his eyes locking onto hers. You gave me the courage to face what I had been avoiding, to be the father my son needs. His words hung in the air between them. Vanessa had heard people speak of change before, but it never seemed real, never seemed as deep as it did now with Marcus. The man who had once been so distant, so consumed with his own world, was now stepping into something more meaningful. He was changing for his son, yes, but in the process, he was changing for himself. I... I've been thinking about what you said, Marcus continued, about how I needed to be there for my son, and how that starts with me. I've been taking steps, small steps, to be better. Vanessa nodded, watching as he spoke. It was clear that the man before her was not the same one who had entered her life. Marcus was becoming a better person, not just through his actions, but through his heart. I can see that, Vanessa said, her voice full of quiet pride. You're doing great, really. Marcus looked at her with something she hadn't expected, a soft, almost hesitant smile. And I want to do more. For you, too. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She had thought their connection was just temporary, just part of the job. But there was more to it now. He wasn't offering her money or favors. He was offering something more, something that felt real. You don't have to do anything for me, Marcus, she said quickly, but the words felt hollow as soon as they left her mouth. Deep down, she knew that everything had already changed between them. Their roles had shifted, and now for the first time, she felt like there was a possibility of something more. You don't have to ask, he said, his voice firm but kind. I've been thinking about it. There's a lot I owe you, and I want to make sure you get the opportunity to do something for yourself, whatever that is. It wasn't the offer she had expected, and she was unsure of how to accept it. For so long, she had been the one making decisions, standing on her own. But something about his sincerity made her want to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could accept the kindness without feeling guilty. I'll think about it, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. But as she walked away, she knew she wouldn't just think about it. She would consider it. The possibility of a different life, the idea that she could choose her path, have a future outside of the cycle of work and survival, was something she hadn't truly allowed herself to imagine until now. That night, as she lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts were consumed by what had been said. It wasn't just Marcus's transformation that had affected her. It was the idea that she could change too, that there was more to her life than the struggles and the paycheck-to-paycheck routine. She had spent so long building walls around herself that she hadn't realized the door was always open. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to face it. The weeks following their conversation marked a turning point for both Marcus and Vanessa. For Marcus, the changes were becoming more tangible. He was no longer the man who buried his emotions behind a veil of success. He had begun to embrace his role as a father, but more importantly, he was reconnecting with himself, the man who had once felt lost beneath his own ambition and the weight of wealth. For Vanessa, the transformation was quieter, more subtle. She had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, on relying only on herself. But now there was a flicker of possibility in her heart, a hope that things could be different. It wasn't just about cleaning other people's homes anymore. She had seen a glimpse of a life beyond the grind, beyond the survival mode that had defined her for so long. And as much as she tried to push that hope aside, it kept resurfacing, tugging at her in ways she couldn't ignore. One morning, as she was cleaning in the guest room, Vanessa was surprised to hear a knock at the door. It was early. Marcus usually wasn't home at this time, Hesitantly, she opened it. Standing in the doorway was Marcus, a warm smile on his face, holding a folder in his hands. Vanessa, I know this might seem sudden, but I've been thinking about something, and I want to offer you an opportunity. Her heart raced. What kind of opportunity? He stepped inside, the scent of fresh coffee lingering behind him. I've been in touch with a few people. There's an opening for a management position at one of the companies I work with. I think you're more than qualified for it. You've got the skills, you've got the work ethic, you've proven that time and time again. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. Was he serious? She had never imagined herself in a position like that, not in a million years. It felt like a dream, something too far out of reach. I don't know what to say, she whispered, still unsure if she had heard him correctly. Marcus placed the folder on the coffee table, his gaze steady. You don't have to decide right now. Take your time. But I wanted you to know that the opportunity is there. It's yours if you want it. Vanessa's mind was racing. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to change everything. To step into a world she had always dreamed of, but never thought was possible for someone like her. The feeling of disbelief settled deep in her chest, but beneath it was something else. Excitement, a quiet stirring, a hope that this was the moment where her life could truly change. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that, she said honestly, her voice shaking a little. I've always been on my own. I've never been in a position to, I don't know, trust someone else with my future like that. Marcus nodded, understanding the hesitation in her voice. I get it. I'm not asking you to jump in without thinking. But sometimes, the hardest part is just taking that first step. You've been living in survival mode for so long, Vanessa. Maybe it's time to start thinking about living for something else. For yourself. His words echoed in her mind long after he left that morning. He wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her a chance to rewrite her story. The walls she had built around herself, the boundaries she had drawn to protect her heart, were starting to feel less like security and more like self-imposed prison bars. That afternoon, as Vanessa stood by the window of her small apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her was shifting. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to entertain the idea that she could have more. More than just the struggle to survive, more than the daily grind. She could have a life that was hers to shape, a life she had control over. The decision wasn't easy. It never was, especially when it meant stepping out of the comfort zone that had kept her safe for so long. But after days of reflection, after confronting her own fears and doubts, she knew what she had to do. The next morning, Vanessa called Marcus. I'm in, she said, her voice steady. I'll take the job. The words felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest. She had made the decision, and now there was no turning back. Marcus's voice on the other end was full of relief. I knew you'd make the right choice. As the days turned into weeks, Vanessa began her new role. The work was challenging, but it was a challenge she embraced. For the first time in her life, she was living with purpose, not just working to survive. She no longer felt like she was standing on the sidelines of her own life. She was stepping into the center of it. Marcus continued to be a steady presence in her life. Their bond had shifted from mere employer and employee to something deeper. A mutual respect, an understanding that they had both experienced something transformative. His own journey, as a father and as a man, had inspired her more than she had realized. They weren't just two people connected by circumstance anymore. They were two people who had helped each other find their way out of the darkness, into something better. But the transformation wasn't just theirs. It was theirs to share with the world. Together, they had found the courage to face their fears, to embrace the unknown, and to move forward with hope in their hearts. And for Vanessa, that hope wasn't just a fleeting dream anymore. It was a future she was finally ready to claim. The changes in both Marcus and Vanessa became more profound as time passed. Their journey had intertwined in ways neither had anticipated, but what stood out the most was the unexpected bond they had forged, not just as employer and employee, but as two people who had helped each other rediscover what truly mattered. For Marcus, this was the most significant transformation of all. The man who had once believed that wealth, status, and power were the keys to success was now embracing a new understanding of life. His relationship with his son grew deeper with every passing day. He was no longer just a provider. He was a present and loving father, someone who took the time to listen, to teach, and to share in his son's growth. Marcus had begun attending therapy, something he had never considered before. He opened up about his past, about the wounds that had shaped him, and the fears that had kept him distant. With the support of a therapist and the quiet strength of Vanessa's unexpected guidance, he began to heal. He stopped running from his feelings, stopped avoiding the tough conversations, and for the first time in a long time, he felt free. Free from the weight of expectations, free from the pressure of maintaining an image, free to simply be himself. Vanessa, too, had undergone a metamorphosis. The woman who had walked into Marcus's mansion just a few months ago, uncertain and guarded, was now stepping into a new chapter of her life. She had taken the job Marcus offered her, and with it came the confidence she never knew she had. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. She was leading, growing, and learning. Every day brought new challenges, but she faced them with strength and determination. Her relationship with Marcus had become one of mutual respect. They didn't need to say much to each other anymore. Everything had been said in the quiet moments, in the way they had both supported one another when it mattered most. But perhaps the most important lesson they had both learned wasn't about success, wealth, or career advancements. It wasn't about climbing the corporate ladder or achieving outward recognition. The true lesson, the one that had come to define their journey, was about human connection, the ability to see and understand each other, to be vulnerable and real with one another, and to offer kindness without expectation. Marcus had learned that power was fleeting, but love and presence were eternal. That his son didn't need a perfect father. He just needed a father who was there, who cared, and who was willing to be open and honest. That's what mattered most. Vanessa had learned that there was nothing wrong with accepting help, with trusting others, with believing in herself. She had spent so long building walls to protect her heart, but the truth was she was stronger when she allowed herself to be vulnerable, to let others in. The opportunity Marcus had offered wasn't just a job. It was a door to a new life. It was proof that she wasn't defined by her past struggles, but by the strength she carried inside of her. One evening, as they both sat together on the porch of Marcus's house, watching the sun set over the horizon, they spoke quietly about everything that had led them to this point. There was no grand conclusion to their story, no final victory, but there was peace, and that in itself was enough. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Marcus said softly, looking out at the horizon. Vanessa nodded, her gaze drifting to the stars that were beginning to twinkle above them. "We have, and it's strange, you know? I never thought I'd end up here. I never thought I'd be this person." "Neither did I," Marcus replied with a small smile. "But maybe that's the beauty of it. We're always changing, always learning, as long as we keep moving forward." Vanessa's heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had spent so much time trying to keep things together, trying to survive. But now she realized that survival wasn't enough. Living was. And in this moment, she was truly living. She turned to Marcus, her expression soft, but filled with conviction. "You know, I think the real lesson here is that we're never done growing. We'll always be learning, always be evolving, and the people we meet along the way, they're the ones who help us do that." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "It's true. I never would have made it through this without you, Vanessa. And I think that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." Vanessa smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "I think I've learned a lot from you, too." The silence that followed was comfortable, not heavy. They didn't need to say anything else. The lesson had already been learned, and it was one that would stay with them forever. They had both faced their fears, stepped out of their comfort zones, and chosen to become the people they were meant to be. They had learned to embrace vulnerability, to let go of the past, and to accept that transformation wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a journey, a continuous one that required patience, faith, and, most importantly, connection. As the stars began to fill the night sky, Vanessa and Marcus sat in quiet understanding, knowing that while their individual journeys were far from over, they had already come so far. In the future? Well, it was a world of possibilities.